Thank you. My friends, as you go through life, do you sometimes wonder if things are just simple coincidences or whether it is part of a greater plan? In Ephesians 2, 9 through 10, we learn that God's prepared in advance good works for us to accomplish. In Jeremiah, we are told that God has a plan for us, for our lives, designed for our own good, not evil. In thinking on these things, I cannot help but be amazed as a young person, growing up outside of New York City, that God would direct my life to work in South Carolina and then to spend the majority of my adult life working and living in Las Vegas, known to many as Sin City, but a place I now call home. God clearly works in a mysterious way, and now in hindsight, I know how He has accompanied me on my life's journey and given me a truly blessed and abundant life. For the past few weeks, Pastor Jackie has preached on how change opens us up to personal growth and the expansion of God's kingdom in our hearts and relationships. Today, I would like to preach on social change and how God works through us to be change agents, or in a word, agents of God's grace in our local communities and places where we live and work. Last year, I had the opportunity of preaching on how I saw during my 30-year career working for Clark County, ordinary miracles occur here in Las Vegas. I just discussed how I saw the working of God's Spirit as to specific capital improvements relating to homelessness, affordable housing, and local food bank developments. Today, I would like to talk about my experiences with race relations and how I witnessed the moving of God's Spirit and the tangible outcomes of those efforts. The first area that I would like to highlight was my time working for the city of Greenville, South Carolina, and in January next year, I will do a subsequent sermon on my involvement here in Las Vegas, working in the central neighborhoods of West Las Vegas and the development of the Dr. Martin Luther King statue. After I finished graduate school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, my first professional work experience in local government began in 1975 in the city of Greenville, South Carolina, working in their community development department. Looking back, this was an exciting time in my life. Not only was I beginning the launch of my career in local government, but I was doing it in a progressive southern city, which had only recently elected a Jewish mayor. Under his leadership, this community was striving to move beyond the darkness of the Jim Crow era and its declining textile factory industrial base, and instead move into the sunlight to prepare itself for its future greatness as a growing metropolitan city located at the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. This shows the location of Greenville, and I find it interesting that Greenville is almost at the same latitude as Las Vegas. This is the city hall where I started my career, and this shows some of the textile base that was on along the Reedy River. Okay, we're going forward. Okay, this was the front cover that you saw in today's bulletin. This is the Reedy River and a very nice bridge that overlooks that falls. Electing a Jewish mayor was a really big deal at the time, as we were talking about the heart of the Bible Belt, where there appeared to be a conservative Southern Baptist church located on every corner, as well the home of the ultra-conservative Bob Jones University. To get a comparison of this political act today, it would be comparable to seeing an Arab Palestinian elected mayor of Tel Aviv in Israel. So that gives you an idea. The life of Max Heller, the then Greenville mayor, was a miracle in itself. Leaving Germany in 1938, he was fortunate to have been sponsored as a foreign Jewish immigrant in Greenville. Had he remained in Europe, it is quite likely that he would have been killed in the Nazi concentration camps, like so many of his family members and contemporaries. Instead, he began his career as a janitor in a textile factory. He subsequently worked his way up to become the president of the factory and then owned his own textile company before he then began his political career as an elected official. Many of you may recall that 1970 and 1971 was a watershed period of real change in the South. Progressive governors like Jimmy Carter of Georgia and Terry Sanford of North Carolina were moving to enact the promises of the civil rights legislation passed by Congress in the 1960s. Instead of fighting and stalling any longer, these governors were actively desegregating the schools and making it clear that the New South was on the move, and that the private sector was welcome to come and invest and develop new high-tech industries to revitalize their communities and states. It was at this time that the communities of Greenville and Spartanburg attracted the German BMW automotive company to come and begin making automotives in the area. Working in Greenville in the mid-1970s, I could not help but feel the energy of this historic public change. Recognizing that this city was part of the Jim Crow area only a few years earlier, I felt honored to work with black and white citizens meeting together to plan real changes in their neighborhoods and to their city. Using the newly enacted Federal Community Development Block Grant Program from HUD, we worked to revitalize many lower-income neighborhoods by constructing street improvements, rehabilitating homes, and constructing many new public recreation facilities. We also worked in the downtown Central Business District through the demolition of older buildings, the construction of street improvements, and the implementation of a public-private partnership that attracted the development of a new Hyatt Hotel, office buildings, atrium, and a parking garage using a federal Urban Development Action Grant from HUD, as well as an EDA grant that I personally prepared from the Department of Commerce. This is the atrium area. This is the parking garage. Things were moving forward, and our community development department was serving as change agents to revitalize relationships between and among the white and African American communities in the city. At this same time, the negative elements of the past occasionally intruded. I remember seeing the white hooded members of the KKK protesting at the county courthouse, hiding behind their masks of linen, espousing their hatred towards others. I also remember hearing an anti-Semitic statement on the radio during Mayor Heller's unsuccessful run for Congress about how he could not call on the Lord for help during the times of struggle as he was Jewish. To me, this comment was absurd, as clearly Jesus was himself a Jew as well as the Messiah. More significantly, I also remember talking privately to an older City of Greenville building official. During the most recent period of Jim Crow law enforcement, this individual had been responsible for removing and placing on the sidewalk the furniture and household items from black homes where black occupants' only crime was having moved into what were considered white neighborhoods, then off limits to black families. I asked him how he felt enforcing these Jim Crow housing laws. He said that he knew the laws were morally wrong, but that if he did not do it, he would lose his job. He also told me, I asked him about the civil rights struggle, and he told me that the civil rights struggle led by Dr. Martin Luther King gave public officials like him an excuse to blame the courts and the outside agitators, and in turn finally stop enforcing the Jim Crow laws pursuant to the recently passed federal civil rights legislation. As Pastor Jackie has said, change can be messy. And for those of us who lived through the 1950s and 1960s, we saw the civil rights struggle played nightly on our national television news programs. We saw protests, sit-ins, riots, the use by police of fire hoses spraying high-pressure streams of water on nonviolent protesters, as well as the beatings and batons of those who were nonviolently dared call for fair and equal rights in our country. After the death of President Kennedy, we then suddenly saw a watershed of new civil rights legislation passed at the federal level, signed by President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was a Southerner from Texas. Amazing when you think of it. This is a sermon about God in action. So now that you have the context of the South in transition, I want to talk about Phyllis Wheatley. The Phyllis Wheatley organization, how we assisted this black-operated nonprofit agency to get a new gym for an unfinished recreation building. Throughout my government career, I and others have helped build numerous recreation and community facilities in lower-income areas. The Phyllis Wheatley Center, however, to me, has a much more spiritual connection and represents a story how I personally saw God's Spirit in action and how I, along with others, were able to make a difference in the lives of lower-income blacks residing in the Nicholtown neighborhood, one of our target redevelopment areas. Many of you may know that Phyllis Wheatley was an American poet who is considered to be the first African American to have published a book of poetry just before the American Revolution. So you see a picture of her that was inscribed in the poems. And here's a statue of her. Born in West Africa, she was kidnapped and subsequently sold into slavery at the age of 7 or 8 and transported to North America, where she was bought by the Wheatley family of Boston. The Wheatleys named her Phyllis after the ship that had transported her to North America. She was given the last name Wheatley, as this was a common custom for enslaved people to receive the surname of their white owners. After she learned to read and write, a revolutionary act in of itself, the Wheatley family encouraged the development of writing poetry when they saw her talent. In an effort to get her poems published, she and the Wheatley son took a trip to London in 1773. They were able to find patents to support the financing of its publishing, and when it was published, this brought her fame in both England and the American colonies. Prominent figures such as George Washington praised her work, although Thomas Jefferson, the writer of the Declaration of Independence, could not conceive how a slave could write such poetry. Phyllis Wheatley was emancipated shortly after the publication of her poetry, and she married John Peters, a poor grocer. Getting back to Greenville, Haiti Duckett organized the Greenville Phyllis Wheatley Association in 1919. During the era of Jim Crow, blacks were restricted from using white facilities. At the time, black recreational facilities were clearly separate and also inherently unequal in quality and maintenance. To provide for their own people, this independent black organization purchased a house on McBee Street in 1920. In 1924, this nonprofit organization subsequently purchased a lot on 12 Broad Street and constructed a 3-story building. During the decades of segregation, the Phyllis Wheatley Association served as the Black Y and provided practically all social and welfare services to Greenville's black community. During World War II, it became a meeting place and a recreation center for black GIs stationed at Donaldson Air Force Base, as the soldiers were unable to use white-controlled facilities which excluded black soldiers. This is the original home that was purchased to start the Y program, the Phyllis Wheatley program. This was the building that was built 3-story that held a gym and had cultural activities in here. There's the gym, personal development, and you see kids singing and participating. Working in Greenville, I had always been impressed with the Phyllis Wheatley Association, as its programming stressed after-school tutorials assistance, cultural development programs, ethnic appreciation moments, as well as a host of active recreation offerings. Students would not simply play sports, but were instead required to do all 3 activities on a daily basis, thus making this recreation center a model of leadership development to me is what a local community center should be and could be. After 50 years of hard use, however, the Broad Street Center fell into dilapidated condition. After a community fundraising drive was undertaken and a new replacement center was built on City of Greenville property in the Nicholtown neighborhood, adjacent to a large public housing complex. When the center opened in 1977, it had the core classrooms built in an L shape, but due to insufficient finances, the gym still remained to be constructed on an empty slab at its center. So this is the building. And the white area is what we're talking about, the gym that was subsequently built. Phyllis Wheatley Community Center. And we're looking in at the gym after it had been built, and here is the gym. Our community development department had been previously engaged in undertaking neighborhood street improvements, housing rehabilitation, and recreation center improvements in the Nicholtown neighborhood. Recognizing the historic importance of the Phyllis Wheatley Association to the larger Greenville community, I recommended to my supervisor, James W. Greer, that we needed to prepare a grant application to the federal government to try and obtain the necessary funds to build this gym facility and complete this vital community building. At the time, the assistant city manager was focusing the federal grant effort only on city projects, so my suggestion was not immediately supported. Working through the back door of the city attorney's office, however, I was able to secure Mayor Heller's support to submit an application that I had personally prepared. Funding for this grant program was part of President Carter's economic stimulus program at the time, administered by the Economic Development Administration, called the Local Public Works Program. In preparing this EDA application, I felt the presence of God supporting this grant application effort. To me, it was simply inconceivable that this important nonprofit center did not have a gym, especially in a neighborhood with loads of young people who clearly needed a safe place to burn off their youthful energies in organized recreation and social development programs. Seeking divine intervention, I even had my local church prayer group pray for the grant application's approval. I was thus understandably disappointed and surprised when the grant was not originally approved. In late 1978, my life took a different turn when I moved on to Las Vegas, where I began my 30-year career with Clark County as a government grants administrator and as the subsequent manager of the Community Resources Management Division in the Clark County Department of Finance. Back in Greenville, however, I learned that my original EDA application had been modified to seek a lesser amount and that it had been resubmitted as part of the second round of the federal grant cycle and had actually been approved by the federal government. With local matching funding support from the Greenville community, the gym was finally built and dedicated in 1978, and it has been in use ever since, serving neighborhood residents. To this, my spirit exclaims, "Praise God." I think I've got that. In praying for an answer as to why my original grant application had not approved, the answer that came back to me was that sometimes it is not a good thing to have all the funds for a facility come all at once from a single source, as this does not provide an opportunity for others to also participate financially. This is especially true for a nonprofit agency, as capital funds are helpful, but every organization needs ongoing financial support to pay its operating costs. The Bible teaches us that where our money is, there is our heart also. People need to have a long-term connection to an organization if it is to survive. In the development of the business community, this is called having skin in the game, as it means that people have to have some money of their own involved in financing a construction project if they are to have a lasting commitment to funding the ongoing programs housed in the building project once the building is finally completed. Consider our church mortgage on this building in which we worship. If we had someone suddenly pay the outstanding balance and retire the debt, this would certainly no doubt make the life easier for our church treasurer. But in the long run, it is much better for each of us to pay down our personal share of that debt, as this gives us a personal connection to this church, and we need to recognize that the church would quickly close if it did not have the regular tithing and gifts from the congregation to pay its ongoing operating costs. This is in line with the old church funding joke, which is that the church has all the money it needs. It's just in your pockets. So, my friends, I have to ask you whether all this was mere coincidence, or was God actually at work in completing the Phyllis Wheatley building? I must tell you that it is my belief that we live in a physical, material world, but I also believe that we are surrounded by an invisible spiritual dimension. Looking at the world through the sunglasses of the eyes of faith, I thus believe that God's Spirit is at work in our lives, and when we are open to the workings of His Spirit, that amazing things can and will happen. In Ephesians 2, verses 9 through 10, we see that God has individually prepared for us in advance a host of good works to do. As I look back on my life, I believe that God has gifted me and others with certain skills, provided us with certain visions of what can be done, and then provided me and others with direction and motivation to make things happen, to His greater glory and the benefit of His people here in the world. As I look back on my time in local government in Greenville and here in Las Vegas, there were many times that I could feel the presence of God's Spirit propelling me forward on some good work. I do not believe in coincidence, but felt that we were doing the good work for which we were predestined to undertake. As the various building projects come to completion, we could then enter the joy of seeing those buildings and programs of benefit to others. During my career in local government, and working subsequently with the nonprofit Nevada Hand, I can honestly state that I have had many moments of such joy as we attended over the years multiple building dedication ceremonies for various facilities serving the homeless and the low income. Just this past Monday, for instance, I had the opportunity of Nevada Hand's dedication of the new Buffalo Cactus Senior Apartments. This is the dedication ceremony, and there's the balloons. This is the outside elevation next to the pool area, and this gives you a view of the elevation of these apartments, these affordable senior housing apartments from the street level. Seeing all these smiling faces at these various dedications, I could not help but feel the joy and love surrounding these events and the hope that we all felt for the future. To me, it was so much more than seeing the politicians taking a bow. It was almost a holy moment where I could feel God's presence and His joy in our collective accomplishments, serving His people in the world. In each of your daily lives, I would invite you to look for God's hand at work in your world. I would ask you to consider seeking His direction in your lives and then to respond to the prompting of His Spirit and then take a step out in faith to give God the glory and the responsibility for the final successful outcome of the initiative. God is amazing, and He will leverage our actions to accomplish much good in the world. As Methodists, we have received our direction from the Reverend John Wesley, the founder of the United Methodist Church, who has instructed us to do good in as many ways as we can, for as many people as we can, and for as long as we can. It has been my personal prayer of my life that God will bless the workings of our hands when we are in alignment with His Spirit. As I look back on my life, I can honestly state that I have seen this occur in countless ways when we move forward in faith to make a positive difference in the lives of others. So I would encourage you, my brothers and sisters, to go forth and do good in God's holy name. I guarantee you that you will feel a holy burning and warmth in your heart when you see what God can do through you and others for the benefit of so many others. God is simply amazing, and I would remind you that we too are co-creators in the development of His earthly kingdom. God has given each of us talents and gifts and arms and brains to do the heavy lifting required. In God's name and to fill His purpose, I would charge you all to now get up and do it. As you undertake the journey, I can also guarantee that you will experience many things and moments that some people may say is just a coincidence. Through the eyes of faith, however, I will tell you now in advance that it is really God in action, working in our world through you and others. To all things, therefore, I say, to God be the glory. Amen.